with Lauren Elizabeth Fine Art, and I help beginner through professional level artists reduce stress while mastering the art of animal art. In today's animal painting tutorial for stress relief, I'm going to walk you through step by step how to paint this intermediate level elephant. I used acrylics, and all the supplies and materials that you'll need for this tutorial are linked down below. Also, if you would like to take part in voting on the tutorial that I paint once a month, I put a poll out on Lauren's YouTube channel, Facebook group where you can join and post your paintings. And once a month, like I said, I do a vote. So this month you all, or the members of this group, voted on an elephant. And lastly, give your support to my friend Megan Moore, who just started her YouTube channel called Megan AM. She has the most soothing, tranquil, peaceful voice you've ever heard, and so I have links down below so that you can subscribe to her channel. But guys, without further ado, let's get painting. Alright then, so all I have out is white and black paint, and with either a detail brush or a small flat brush like I have, with a damp clean brush we're going to get started drawing. I mixed up a medium gray with white and black. Doesn't really matter if it's too dark or too light, just as long as you can see it over your plain white canvas. So in the upper right hand corner of my canvas, I'm going to create an oval at an angle. This is for the elephant's head. So the reason we want it at an angle is so that it can kind of angle down towards where we can create the trunk. We want that head to be pretty large. However, we want the ears to be even larger, and the ears are going to come out on the left. But before we do the ears, we want to trail down to create that trunk. So the trunk is going to be wider at the top, but then thinner towards the bottom. And I kind of want to angle it to be the start of that tusk. Next, I'm going to create two curved lines. They're going to be on the left and right sides of the trunk, and at the base, this is our tusk. At the base of the tusk, it's going to be wider and then trail off to a thin point. The left tusk, you're going to see the point. The right side, you might not, because it'll trail off the side of your canvas. Next, I'm going to draw that large ear. Now I recommend you watch me before giving it a try, because I'm going to make kind of a C-shaped ear. It's going to come down, and then I want kind of the base of that ear at the top of the head to come out, and then I want to connect it from the bottom up. Directly below the bottom of that ear, I'm going to create an angled line for the chest. And then on the left and right sides of that line, I'm going to create two limbs, the front legs of the elephant. After that, I'm going to create a tiny little horizontal line right behind those ears, and that's the elephant's back. Now, if you enjoy drawing and painting animals, and you also struggle with anxiety, depression, or addiction, I've created this online animal art masterclass designed for artists of all levels who want to better manage their stress, build confidence, and master the art of animal art. If you would like to preview one of the tutorials from the masterclass, make sure you check out the link down below. But guys, without further ado, let's get back to drawing. After you've painted that line for the back, we're going to actually extend out the right to the left of that trunk. So you notice that I just want to create a little bit wider area there. And I want to extend up the chest and just a few lines so that you can really tell that that's the left leg that's larger than that back leg that's kind of behind the trunk and on the other side. To help me figure out where to place that eye, I created two lines, one on the left side of the left tusk, and then one that's kind of following down from the trunk. So if I were to create a line from the trunk, I go up a little bit towards that line I just made that's kind of headed towards that ear, the left ear. Right in between those two lines, I can make that almond-shaped eye. Anytime that your brush gets thick on your canvas, you'll need to wash out your brush and make it so it's damp and clean. And you might need to mix up some more gray, which is what I did just there. So this area where it connects from the head to the ear, I wanted to make it a little bit thicker at the base. And then I was able to create that top of that right ear. Now you want to make sure that the head is round at the top and then kind of falls straight towards that trunk. I want to add a little bit of a wave to the edge of the bottom of the ear. It acts as a fan, so it's not just going to be one straight line. All right, guys, so when you're done with your sketch, or if you need to do any touch-ups, make sure you do that, and then we'll move right into our painting. All right, so grab a clean flat brush. This one is going to be a little bit bigger than what we were using. I recommend a size 8 or 10 or larger flat brush. I'm using white and phthalocyanin blue, and I want a lot of white here, not very much blue. This is actually a little too much blue, but you can always add second or third or fourth coats. And that also brings up my next point. If at any point you mess up, the nice thing about acrylics is that you can always fix it. Acrylics is all about layers, and if you make a mistake, you can layer the right step over top. So I want to paint the sides, and I want to paint all around the elephant, right where the middle of the trunk is. That's kind of where I'm going to stop the blue, because we want to start our grass and the trees back there. But before I do that, I want to paint just basically the top half with blue. Still using my flat brush, I'm going to grab yellow and phthalocyanin blue. This makes a green. So I don't need a whole lot of blue because it's going to be more of a medium green here. But very loosely, I'm going to apply brush strokes vertically just where I finished that blue sky. So right below that where I stopped, kind of in the middle of the trunk, that's where I'm going to create that thickness. I want to keep the bottom where it connects to that more orange grassy area that we'll be painting soon. I want to make it darker on the bottom there. And I also want to make that follow along to the sides. Now I recommend you watch me and the colors that I mix here for this bottom area, because I do a couple different colors. So first I do cadmium yellow and orange for the top right underneath this grass area or those trees. And I come down adding in more orange, and then at the very bottom I add in raw sienna. So it's basically more yellow at the top, kind of becomes more orange, and then goes into a brown. It's almost dead grass that's become real prickly, and I want to bring out those yellows and oranges where it kind of blends into more of a brown at the bottom. So to do that, I just grabbed some raw sienna and some orange, and I just applied that on the bottom of the elephant, kind of those gaps that we see. However, I wanted to move those legs over a little bit. Now I didn't make it look exactly like the reference photo, and so I kind of want to fix it up a little bit. And what I did was just carry this brown over top that, and I'm going to paint over those legs in the right areas. So if you don't want to do this where you're fixing up the legs like I am, you don't have to. So, but here is how I mix those colors straight on my canvas. Now the next few steps get a little bit more tricky because we're using all different shades of gray. Starting with the dark gray, which we're going to paint under the ear and the jaw and those legs, especially that back leg. Now here's also where I'm going to kind of fix up those limbs because I wanted to kind of pull them back a little bit. You don't have to if you had drawn it in the way you want it, but I'm going to basically add this gray, this dark gray towards the left side, and as I do that, I'm going to add in more white to kind of and blend that on my canvas because that's where it's getting a little bit more light exposure. Now I just want to point out the light source, it's very important to note, is coming from behind the elephant. That's where we're getting such extreme darks and extreme lights coming from that sunshine. It's kind of like the sunset is on the right side of the elephant. Okay, so here's where I'm fixing up the limbs and also adding in more of my light grays. At any point, if you want to pause or go back to something, you feel free to do that at any time. Starting out, my brush strokes are getting loose, and as I work my way in towards detail, that's when my brush strokes get a little bit tinier and more precise. But just remember, I am trying to fix those limbs while also trying to get that shadow from underneath the jaw and making sure it gets lighter as it moves out towards the left of the elephant. The other darkest area is the trunk, the bottom of it. So right around where those tusks are, I'm going to create a dark gray that is basically the same darkness as what I used for those legs, and especially at the bottom. As we work our way up, just like we did with the body, I'm going to add in more white to kind of make it a little bit lighter, just ever so slightly as I work up the head. The other area I see darkness, or the darkest parts, are right along this line towards the left of the left side of the tusk and the trunk, I guess. And then again, one along the jaw line that kind of cuts into the inside of the ear. Can you see where the other darker areas are? So right along the top of the ear, it's definitely getting very little light. And that kind of follows along the center of the forehead along to the bottom of the tusk. We slowly build up that color over time, but it's definitely creating a dark gray right before it goes into that beautiful light orange and yellow. So I'm going to work down that forehead along the side of that trunk, and then also on the inside of that ear. So we painted the top of the ear. Now we kind of need to create a shadow on the inside of that ear. Now, once you work on the inside of that ear, it's very important that you don't make a gray that's the same color as the dark gray that you have for the legs. Okay, you need it to be lighter, but not too light. So just simply adding a little bit more white into your gray, it should stand out in front of that dark gray that we have for the limbs. If it's too dark, we won't see it, but if it's too light, it'll just be too light so that we can't add those light tones over top. So just have that middle tone where you have a little bit of white and a little bit of black, and you can kind of change it based on how much white or black you add to it. You're changing the value that way. Now that same gray we can add to the top of the head, because this is a little bit lighter gray than we had for the bottom, because we used that for the darkest parts. All right, so we're going to pause from the elephant just for a little bit and do any touch-ups that we need to do to the background, because our legs are dry, especially where I need to do some fixing up, and I left some white there because I want to cover up that with my raw sienna and my orange mixture. So if you need to do this too, by all means go for it. You may have to do 1 or 2 or 3 coats to cover up that dark gray. All right, now things are getting good because we are going to add blue to those tusks. We're going to mix up white and phthalocyan and blue. And so I'm just going to paint the entire tusk, both of them, with this blue. Now, when I painted those tusks, I realized that the sky is just as blue as the tusks. And I don't want that. I want them to be a darker blue than the sky. So if you need to, like I am, to make that lighter, then by all means go for it. What a little technique that I'm using right now is called a wash, or what I call the tint technique. So I have a damp brush and I'm watering down whatever color I'm using. In this case, it's white. And I'm just going to layer a thin coat of white over top my blue. So you can still see the blue shining through from the bottom, but you're not losing that blue by putting that thin layer of white over top. So add that now, being careful to not paint over your elephant, and also making sure you paint the sides. Now we're going to move on to our medium tones. So this time we're going to add even more white than what we were using before. And my brush strokes are getting a little bit tighter, but I'm basically layering over top and hugging those dark tones that we just layered. Okay, so while I fill in the rest of the white, I'm also going to have these layer over top or right next to the dark tones that I just applied. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that I am kind of outlining the eye. I have a purpose for that later, so I kind of want to leave a little bit of a white outline around the eye, such a tiny one, as I apply these medium tones. Now we're not done with this specific medium tone, but I'm going to add just a little bit of white to it to create a light border on the right side of the elephant. We're going to start just placing down where those real bright highlights are going to go later. And we'll paint those with our oranges and yellows. Let's add some black into that to create a darker medium tone than what we were doing on the side, the left side of the face. So before we added that highlight, let's make a gray that's a bit darker than that as we move to the left, because it gets real dark right behind that left tusk. So I could even probably make do with going even darker than what I've been applying here. So our goal here is to fill in the rest of the white. That's kind of our goal as we place the first layers of our color using acrylic. I'm just making more of the same tone that I was just using because I want to use this color to fill in that ear. As I move to the edge of that ear, especially towards the bottom, because we want that top to be real dark, remember? I'm going to add white to keep those edges lighter than the body that we painted. So this is kind of like when we were painting the other part of that ear closer to the legs. Well, we want this to stand out over that medium gray around the belly, and so that's why I added more white to that. Next, I'm going to add more black to this color because as I fade down towards the bottom, not only do I want to make that ear a little bit longer down, I want to kind of pull it down, I also want to make it darker there. But staying careful that it's not so dark that I lose it over the limbs. Keep this color so that I can use it for the back because we have a little bit of white left on the back. All right, so let's revisit our black. So straight black, I only have what's left of the grays on my brush to mix that in with. And we want to keep this area the darkest And I had a little bit of trouble with this because I wasn't quite sure where to put that lightness on the chest. But actually, I realized that you can keep this whole area the same color, dark gray. So that back leg that is in the distance, but also this leg, the front of it can be much darker. But as it goes to the left, it's going to be a bit lighter. The other area that isn't quite right is right underneath the ear. I want to kind of separate that, make it a bit darker. And the belly. The belly isn't going to be light, it's going to be much darker. Now, as you move up, because we did use a medium tone for the front of that around the body, you can always add in just a smidge of white, just so you can blend that on dry paint. Because now it's dry underneath that, so to kind of help with that, just add a little bit of white to your gray so that it can kind of move it up without it looking so choppy and so much brush strokes on there. You see that? I can fix that later, but there's some real obvious brush strokes that I kind of want to get rid of with a gray that kind of connects the two. All right, so now we're going to work on the eye. I'm going to fill in the eye first with my detail brush and black. All right, depending on where you left your white outline, I'm going to create a black border around the top and bottom of the eye. That may lay over top the white, that may actually just cut into your gray. But we're just going to create a little outline around the eye like I did. With black still on my brush, I'm going to create that line along the left side of the tusk, going in towards the left side of the trunk. Now let's go over with our black any of the darkest areas, just because we want to really pull out those darkest darks and the lightest lights as we build up to our highlights. I end up at the end filling in the front chest with black and the left or the right side of that left leg, and then all of that right leg. We can barely see it in the reference photo, but let's fill in that back ear with our black. Right now it's just a sliver of white, and so we just want to fill in between the front ear and the back ear with black. That's when I noticed that I want to make this front ear definitely dark, so I created a dark gray with my white and black. And I just really want to define those darkness areas on this front ear. We also really want to define that darkness, that shadow that's being created on the front ear as we move down towards the limbs. As I lay down one area of darks and lights at a time, I'm realizing where I need to add the next area of lights or darks, like right here behind the tusk. All right, so now we have the whole canvas painted with at least our first layer. So let's start adding in that texture, those wrinkles and indents on the skin of the elephant. So I'm going to add a shadow that's on that left tusk. And now I'm going to start adding vertical and horizontal lines, especially where that highlight separates that real darkness of dark gray. So you notice that I kind of split that face between the dark area on the left and the light area on the right. So right over top that, on both sides, I'm going to create these horizontal, very thin lines, okay? So I'm not trying to make these thick. I want them to be very dark, but not where it's so thick that it kind of looks almost like there's something laying on the elephant's face. I want to put very loose brush strokes as well on the ear. I'm not really making so much as horizontal lines, more lines that kind of come down along where that ear comes down. Now to soften this darkness against the medium tones, I'm going to add this in-between gray. So I know that's hard to find. It's like not as dark as the darkest gray that we made for those dark areas between the head and the ear. And it's not as light as our lightest grays for the front of the ear. It's right in between. And I can layer them just by kind of clumps of placing paint in that area. And so I use a lot of this color to kind of combine those two tones together, the lights, the mediums, and the really darks. So I'm going to go along the trunk with this color, and I want to make a note. That trunk, especially on the left side, all the way to that highlight, is going to be very dark, almost black dark. And then right underneath the trunk and around that front ear, it's going to be also very dark. So at the end, I do touch-ups where I darken this area up very much more than I have now. Now let's start adding a few vertical lines or more angled lines. So if you notice right along the top of the ear and the head, there's a lot of pretty big wrinkles there. Now don't be discouraged if you're having trouble getting the exact tones of gray that I am. It can take time, and all it is though, it's pretty simple when you think about it. If you want to make it lighter, just add white. If you want to make it darker, just add more black. And you can always move to a different area on your paint palette to remix if it's too dark or too light. So don't be discouraged, it takes some practice as well. Now I'm going to go to a lighter gray so that I can kind of go over some of that white area on the outline of that eye. So I kind of want to just touch up some of those white spots, but also kind of make that softer eye of the elephant. They have these tiny eyes, but it still speaks kindness and love and peace in their eyes, and I really want to get that by kind of closing it up a bit. I'm going to use that gray to create some of the shadow that we see on the face, especially on the left side of the forehead. And that kind of trails down below the eye and all the way down to the side of that trunk. Now I'm going to add a little bit more white to create a light gray, and I want to soften up some of those darker areas on the trunk. So this is more of a medium to light gray because we have some real sharp darks and some pretty light grays, and I just kind of want to connect them because on this end of that ear, it kind of gradually goes into that dark area on the top. And then right along those kind of wavy areas of the fan-like ear, I kind of want to make sure that's pretty light, and then it kind of gets darker towards the bottom. Now let's not waste this gray because we actually see that there are highlights from the right side coming in on the trunk, especially where the tusks are. And you also want to add some texture, so we can add some vertical and horizontal texture just with dabs of our paint over those dark areas as we prepare to add those highlights of our orange and yellow. I will say though, the area where the tusks are, and I noticed this at the end, is darker than where you don't see the tusks. So what I mean by that is there's a shadow being casted from those tusks on the center of the trunk. Here I'm just softening that area. You likely did this when I mentioned it earlier, where I kind of wanted to soften it with a gray that kind of combines the light and the dark. And then I also I realized this needs to be darker in the reference photo, just like the top of the ear, it's a bit darker. Alrighty, so we're going to move on to the tusks. I want to make a note here. We are going to make a light gray for the inner middle part of the tusks, a dark blue and gray for the area closest to the elephant, the base, and then we're eventually going to add our major highlights to the tip of that left tusk, and then along this tusk here, it's going to be a very light white. So I can add that highlight to the other tusk, where we'll also be adding some oranges and yellows to that area. I'm going to mix up a dark blue with my phthalocyanin blue and my white. Make sure to get those darkest areas closer to the base of the tusk with our dark blues and our grays. And then along the left side of the tusk, it's going to be a bit lighter, and especially towards the tip of the tusk, it's going to get those highlights. I'm going to trail this blue off the end of my canvas on the inside center of the tusk, kind of closer to the bottom of the tusk. Oh, this is the fun part, guys. Now that our elephant pretty much is completed, now we got to add those beautiful highlights of yellow and orange. So cadmium, yellow, and orange is what I'll be using to add those highlights on the right side of the elephant. And a little bit of white too, especially at the top of the elephant. And if you watch me, you'll notice that just on the right side along the head and the trunk, I'll be adding some major highlights right where it starts to get real dark. So on the left side of this highlight, it's really dark, almost black. That's what we want. And we'll have to do touch-ups for at the end. But let's really get that light at the top of the head and along the top of the ears. I'll be gliding this with an outline around the front and back ear. And then little dabs of this color along the tusk because we want to get that texture of the trunk. And just remember, I noticed this later, but we want this area right here to have a shadow because there's a shadow being casted, like I mentioned earlier, from the tusk. Now the other area that we see this is on the back leg, just a little line that I'm going to trail down, and very slightly on the front leg on the bottom, and I extended that up a little bit for the chest, and we're going to make that in a little bit. I'm going to make that yellow come down a little bit towards the left side of that main highlight on the forehead. Now I want you to learn from my mistakes here, and I'll tell you exactly what I should have done. So right now I created a light gray, and that is incorrect. This area right here needs to be darker that I paint in. It is very much a dark gray all the way down to the trunk, and that is actually where it's the darkest. So I should be making this more of a dark gray, so add in more black than I am. And definitely along that highlight, the left of that highlight that we just made, it should be very dark. To preview me figuring this out, that comes in just a second. I'll make a darker gray for that, and then especially making that trunk right to the right of that left tusk will be much darker. Another area that you can learn from my mistakes is right here. I go a little bit too loose and too much paint in this area where I added it to the chest and the orange and yellows to the left leg and back leg. You can just simply make a few lines. You don't have to go crazy with your yellow paint here because it's really not getting that much light right here. You are really going to learn a lot from this tutorial because, again, the mistake that I make is I make this too dark. You see that? It's supposed to be light. Now on the right tusk, that is accurate where I made it darker in there. So I could do that with my dark gray. However, I added too much darkness to that left tusk and it threw me off. So keep that light. And the last thing before I do my final touches, which are just repeats of what we've been doing, is I add a little bit of this yellow-orange mixture to very loosely to the ear. Now I kind of go over this a little bit in my touch-ups, but I think it still works. Even though we really don't see it on the ear of the reference photo, I think it looks beautiful. So you can add more, you can add less, you can add none at all. That is your decision entirely. And so are the final touches that we add here. Basically just repeats of what we've done, adding maybe a little bit more lights in some areas. Like I'll be adding more lights to the left side of the elephant's body. So the left side of this limb and then the left side, like we did at the very beginning. I'll be kind of touching up some of that area of the grass, the dead grass that's kind of orange and yellow. I'll be bringing that out with more orange and more yellow. If you want to add more blue to the tusk, like I'll be fixing that up where it should be lighter on the left tusk. So just take your time to make it your own, make it look like how you want it to, and then don't forget to sign it. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I thoroughly enjoy making these for you. If you have any questions, you can just comment below. Have a wonderful day. Bye.